I'd like to welcome you to this webinar entitled The AMSA Scorecard, Where We've Been and Where We're Going, What's in Store for Your Institution. We will be leaving time at the end for questions and answers, and I encourage you to email me questions during the webinar to sberg@pewtrust.org, and you'll find my email on the screen on your computer. At this time, I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Dr. Daniel Carlat is the director of the Prescription Project at the Pew Charitable Trust, as well as an associate clinical professor of psychiatry at Tufts University School of Medicine. Ms. Reshma Ramachandran currently serves as the Pharm-Free Fellow at the American Medical Student Association. She is a fourth-year medical student at the Warren Alpert School of Medicine at Brown University, as well as an MPP candidate at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. In addition, we'd like to acknowledge Dr. Joseph Ross of Yale University for his contributions as a consultant to this project. The presenters' disclosures are listed here on this slide. This talk and associated materials were made possible by a grant from the State Attorney General Consumer Prescriber Education Grant Program, which is funded by the multi-state settlement of consumer fraud claims regarding the marketing of the prescription drug Neurontin. At this time, I'd like to turn the call over to Dr. Carlat.
Thank you very much, Sally Ann. Good afternoon, everybody. The purpose of this webinar is to ensure that academic medical institutions understand the revised AMSA scorecard and are prepared for the 2014 scoring cycle, which is when the new scorecard will be used for the first time. I will begin by giving an overview of the AMSA scorecard and an explanation of how it has been revised. Reshma Ramachandran will then describe each of the conflict of interest domains and how they are scored, and we'll also review the process and timeline for submitting policies. And then we'll have some time for a Q&A afterwards. So the first AMSA Pharm-Free scorecard was developed and used in 2007, and that one consisted mainly of a question ascertaining whether schools did or did not have any conflict of interest policies. In 2008, the Pew Charitable Trusts funded the Prescription Project to work with both Community Catalyst and AMSA in order to create a comprehensive scorecard to measure each of the major categories of financial relationships between medical schools and the pharmaceutical and device industries. Why do we need a scorecard? Our overall objective is to protect the integrity of medical education. Promotional spending by the pharmaceutical industry has increased markedly over the years, and there's been a growing medical literature that has associated pharmaceutical promotional practices with changes in doctors' attitudes, and also more recently with changes in doctors' prescribing behavior. Two recent studies found that physician graduates from medical schools with gift bans in place were less likely than control groups to prescribe newly marketed medications that had no clear advantages over the inexpensive generics in that class. These data are preliminary evidence that strong conflict of interest policies may help trainees resist promotional hype and encourage more rational prescribing. Since the AMSA scorecard started measuring conflict of interest policies, we've seen consistent change and strengthening of policies. If you look at the lower left-hand corner of this bar graph, you'll see that the number of medical schools earning the highest A grade has increased steadily over the years. Overall, in 2008, 30% of schools earned A or B grades, and in the latest scorecard, the 2013 scorecard, this went up to over 70%. AMSA and Pew have realized that there are some limitations of the current scorecard which led to the revision. First, neither the validity nor the reliability of the scorecard have been established in the peer-reviewed literature. And we are working currently on a paper to remedy this for the new scorecard. Secondly, the scorecard categories were not always clear and did not always distinguish between types of interactions that were actually occurring in medical schools and academic medical centers. And third, it measures policies in medical schools. I actually added a little bullet to the slide in the latest one that I sent you. It measures, maybe I didn't, anyway, it measures policies in medical schools, but not in teaching hospitals, which is where much of the medical training takes place. And finally, the current scorecard measures policy, but it has no way of assessing compliance or enforcement. So in order to address these limitations, in May of 2012, Pew formed an expert task force composed of leaders in academic medicine, including deans and former deans of medical schools, to meet and review the literature and to create updated recommendations for best practices in conflict of interest policies. As a result of these recommendations, the AMSA scorecard was revised and the scoring methodology was improved to improve our ability to more accurately capture the nuances of each school's policy. Next slide. In addition, we made sure that the new scorecard would be directly applicable to teaching hospitals as well as medical schools. And there are now 2 items in the scorecard that are specific to teaching hospitals, as you'll hear about shortly. So with that, I'll turn the call over to Reshma Ramachandran, who will go over each of the scorecard items in some detail so that you'll know exactly how your policies will be scored. Reshma?
Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy. Welcome to GoToWebinar, web events made easy.
Her microphone, and she's
sorry. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is, again, Reshma Ramachandran, and I'm this year's Pharm 3 Fellow at the American Medical Student Association. As you can see here, we have a list of the revised scorecard domains. Last year, we had 11 domains, and we've expanded and revised these domains and now have 16 in total, some of which are applicable only to teaching hospitals, and some that are specific to medical schools. Next slide. And to give you an example of how the domains have changed and expanded, we've separated some of the categories from before. For instance, you can see here gifts and meals are now separated into 2 separate categories, gifts and another one as meals. We've defined consulting relationships in 2 different ways, one that is specific to marketing and another that's specific to research and scientific activities. And for industry sales representatives, we've again separated this to look at both pharmaceutical sales representatives as well as medical device representatives. And we've added a number of new domains that we haven't had in the prior version of the scorecard, including the extension of conflict of interest policies to community affiliates, and also ghostwriting and honorary authorship. Next slide. So now we'll go into the specifics of each domain and how the criteria for each domain is laid out. First off, you can notice that we've changed the criteria for each domain from a scale of 0 to 3, 3 being the highest in the old scorecard, to now a 1 to 5 scale, where 5 is the highest score a school can achieve in a domain. So the first category is gifts, and here we give a 5 for gifts of any nature and value that are not allowed in an institution. We give a 3 for gifts if the value is less than or equal to $10. And this rationale was based on the current requirements for the Physician Payment Sunshine Act. We give a 2 for gifts that are of value of less than or equal to $100. And this is a value that was based on the AMA ethical guidelines. And a 1 is that if a school has no policy or no restriction on gifts. And next slide. And the next category is meals. Here, it's the criteria is analogous to the gifts category, where 5 is no meals of any type are allowed. 3 is meals are allowed only if the value is less than or equal to $10, again consistent with the Sunshine Act reporting requirements, or if meals are given through unrestricted funds for CME events. So if this exception is allowed in the policy, we'll give the policy a 3, and 1 is no policy or no restrictions. Next category is industry-funded speaking relationships. And here, we're specifically looking at non-ACCME accredited speaking relationships. And this also includes speakers bureaus, but any sort of speaking event where industry is funding the speaker. A 5 is faculty are not permitted to speak on speakers bureaus or to accept any honorarium or reimbursement for a speaking event from industry. 4 is that there's no participation allowed in purely commercial speakers bureaus, but a faculty member or an employee may participate in another speaking event as long as there's an institutional review and approval process. 3, participation in a industry-funded speaking relationship is strongly discouraged, but it is allowed after an institutional review and approval process. Next slide. A 2 is that participation is allowed as long as the faculty member controls all of their presentation content. We've seen language in policies that say the content must be more educational than promotional, and that the content must reflect their own independent opinions. A contract is required to be submitted to the institution, letting them know that the faculty member has a speaking relationship, but no approval is needed beforehand from the academic medical center. And 1 is no policy. Next slide. So the next category is looking at industry funding of CME events. And here we give a 5 for CME activities to not be supported. So in general, we say CME activities should not be supported, but we do give a 5 for rare exceptions, such as a central blinded pool. And this would be permissible under a 5 score. For 3, we say support for CME from industry is accepted through a central pooled fund to a department or division, but there must be measures in place, namely that the department cannot make a profit from the programs, that the department has complete control over the speakers and the topics of the program, and that the support must be by no less than 2 companies. A 2 is that support is accepted for specific courses, but there must be measures in place. Again, departments cannot make a profit from the programs, and the support must be by no less than 2 companies. A 1 is that support is accepted, and as long as it follows ACCME requirements and there are no other measures in place, a policy will receive this score. Next slide. So the next category is attendance of industry-sponsored educational events. Here, a 5 is that faculty, students, and trainees, so all house staff and fellows, should not attend any industry-sponsored marketing events or any non-ACCME accredited educational events. A 4 is attendance is allowed, but there must be prior approval for a faculty, student, or trainee to attend these events, and reimbursement for travel is not allowed. A 3 is that attendance is allowed for these events, and reimbursement for travel is allowed, but there must be a formal approval process beforehand. 2 is travel reimbursement is allowed, but no other remuneration is allowed for a faculty, student, or trainee to attend industry-sponsored educational event. There must be a disclosure of any financial support to attend this event. This must be given beforehand, but there is no formal approval process in place. And 1 is no policy. Next is industry-supported clinical fellowships. And here, a 5 is that these are not allowed. However, there's an exception for competitive fellowships that are strictly for scientific research training. And this must be completely managed by the institution. So the institution must be the group that is selecting the participants must be selecting the participants for the fellowships. A 3 is that funding for industry-supported clinical fellowships is allowed, but the funds cannot be earmarked for particular individuals, and industry must not have a role in selecting any recipients. 2 is that industry-supported fellowships, clinical fellowships are allowed, but there must be prior institutional approval for the release of these funds. And 1 is no policies in place. Next slide. The next categories are one of our new categories, which is ghostwriting and honorary authorship. And here a 5 is strictly prohibited. And we include language to say that ICMG standards for authorship and contributorship must also be followed. 3 is that ghostwriting and honorary authorship are discouraged, but it's not strictly prohibited. And 1, there's no policy in place. And here, the next category is consulting and advising relationships for marketing. And so this excludes any research, scientific research or speaking relationships. And these are defined as relationships for faculty members or physicians who are hired by a pharmaceutical or medical device company to consult and advise in order to increase sales of the company's product. And this is different than promotional speaking, but it may include development of slide sets for promotional talks and working with marketing teams to develop strategies to increase product uptake in a community. 5 is no consulting or advising relationships of this type are allowed. 4 is that they are discouraged but allowed after there is a prior review of the contract and there is a determination that there's no potential conflicts of interest between the consulting and advising relationship and the faculty members' clinical and research responsibilities. 3 is that these relationships are allowed, but there must be a prior review of contract to ensure that there are clear deliverables outlined in the contract and that the fee given is set at fair market value. 2 is that these relationships are allowed, but it does require a contract to be submitted beforehand without a formal review and approval process. And 1 is that there is no restrictions or policy in place. Next slide. The next category is the other part of consulting and advising relationships for research and scientific activities. And we define this as relationships related specifically to faculty members who are hired by a pharmaceutical or medical device company to consult and advise on behalf of a research and scientific study or activity related to drug development. So 5 here is that the contract must be submitted beforehand and reviewed by the institution to ensure that there is no potential conflicts of interest between the topic of the consultation and the faculty's clinical work. Again, the contract must also have clear deliverables and the fee must be set at a fair market value. 3 is that the contract must be submitted, but there's no review and approval process beforehand by the institution required. And 1 is there's no policy. The next category is specific only to teaching hospitals. The category is pharmaceutical samples. And here, for a 5, we give a 5 to institutions that do not accept any pharmaceutical samples under any circumstances. A 4 is that pharmaceutical samples are accepted under very narrow circumstances, where a P&T committee undergoes an approval process to ensure that the samples are going to underserved populations before they are accepted. A 3 is that pharmaceutical samples are accepted, but it does require distribution through a central pharmacy and not given directly to any physicians. And 1 is that physicians may accept and distribute samples and distribute to patients as they please. Next slide. This category, Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, is also specific to the Teaching Hospital Scorecard. So a 5 here is that city members of the P&T Committee cannot have any financial relationships with industry. However, they may request a consultant or discussant who has a potential conflict of interest to assist with a specific decision. That person who is consulted is not allowed to vote on the committee and must not be present at the time of voting as well. And they also must disclose any potential conflicts of interest they have to the committee. 4 is that with rare exception, no voting member may have a financial relationship with industry. Again, they may request a consultant as described in the 5 score, and the members again must file periodic financial disclosures. Next slide. 3 is that voting members of the P&T committee may have financial relationships with industry, but they must recuse themselves from decisions when they have a relevant conflict of interest. 2 is a less stringent policy where members of the P&T committee simply have to disclose their conflicts of interest and doesn't prohibit any of those individuals from participating in any purchasing decisions. And 1 is no policy in place. The next category is the access of pharmaceutical sales representatives to academic medical centers. This is on the scorecard for both medical schools and teaching hospitals. A 5 here is that access to AMCs and affiliated entities to any trainees and faculty is completely not allowed for pharmaceutical sales reps. The faculty may invite other industry workers who are not pharmaceutical sales reps for specific discussions that do not involve marketing of a specific product. So they might discuss scientific research, but they're not allowed to discuss any promotional or marketing specific things about the products. A 4 is that faculty members are allowed to meet with pharmaceutical sales reps, but they must do so under very specific circumstances. Not in any patient care areas. An appointment is required beforehand, and an identifying badge must be on the pharmaceutical sales reps when he is inside the institution. A 2 is that pharmaceutical sales reps are allowed to meet with faculty, but again, only in non-patient care areas. An appointment beforehand is not necessary. And 1 is no policy. Next category is the access of medical device representatives to academic medical centers. 5 is that medical device representatives are not present or permitted in any patient care areas. They are only allowed there to provide necessary technical assistance on devices and other equipment already purchased, and this must be only done by appointment. So an example of this would be the field engineers that are often present for cardiologists who are doing EP procedures. 2 is that access is allowed for medical device reps to the academic medical center, but there are no measures in place to prevent any sales in clinical areas. However, registration, invitation, and identification is required for the medical device rep to be on campus. And 1 is that no policy is in place. Next slide. The next category is conflict of interest disclosure. There's a difference between how we're scoring teaching hospitals and medical schools in this case. First, I just want to go over what the differentiation between internal and external disclosure is. So we define internal disclosure as faculty members submitting disclosures to an institution through a detailed form to a compliance office. This happens only internally and is not publicly posted anywhere. External disclosure is defined in multiple ways. You have 3 different ways. So first, public disclosure on a website that mimics Sunshine Act reporting, where the faculty members' financial disclosures are listed in detail on a website. The other type of external disclosure is actively to medical students and house staff. This must be context specific. So for instance, if a Dr. X is doing cardiology rounds, he would disclose to any students and residents beforehand the relevant disclosure and that he earns a certain amount of money to give promotional talks regarding a specific cardiac drug for a particular company. The next category, our next type of external disclosure is actively again to patients this time. This is specific only to teaching hospitals and again must be context specific. This would require a faculty member to give patients disclosures in a consumer-friendly way. So for instance, a doctor would go up to a patient and say, Dr. X is paid by the following companies to give talks about the following products that he may prescribe. So for the teaching hospital, we give a 5 for internal disclosure plus 2 out of the 3 forms of external disclosure. A 4 would be internal disclosure and 1 of the 3 forms of the external disclosure that I described. and 2 would be only internal disclosure, and a 1 would be no form of disclosure would be required. For medical schools, a 5 would be internal disclosure plus one of the 2 forms of external disclosure. So either publicly posting conflicts of interest on a website or publicly disclosing, actively disclosing conflicts of interest to medical students in a context-specific way. A 2 would be only internal disclosure, and a 1 would be no form of disclosure is required. Next slide. Next category is existence of an adequate conflict of interest curriculum. 5 would be that a conflict of interest curriculum is required for medical students, teaching faculty, and house staff, and the curricular content and objectives are consistent with the AMSA model curriculum standards. We have the copy of the AMSA model curriculum along with example curriculum pieces on amsa.org/scorecard, so you can use that as a reference. A 4 is that a curriculum is required, but the content and objectives are not consistent with the AMSA model curriculum standards. And a 3 is that a curriculum is offered, but not required, or only required, for 2 out of the 3 groups of clinicians. So only either medical students, teaching faculty, or house staff. And a 2 is that the curriculum is offered, but required for only 1 of the 3 groups of clinicians. And 1 is that it's not offered or required. Next slide. The next category is the extension of COI policies from academic medical centers to community affiliates. So here, a 5 applies to all faculty in all settings, and that the consequences for non-compliance are made explicit, so including losing an academic appointment. A 3 is that extension of these policies are encouraged in all settings, but compliance is voluntary with no consequences for non-compliance. And 1 is that it does not apply outside of the academic medical center and its major affiliated teaching hospitals. Next slide. This year, another change that's happening with the new scorecard is that in addition to asking the questions about enforcement and sanctions, the answers to these questions will contribute to the overall scorecard grade, which was not done in the past. So we ask first, A, is it clear that there is a party responsible for general oversight to ensure compliance? Yes or no? And B, is it clear that there are sanctions? So is there a process for punishment for non-compliance? Yes or no? Next slide. Now I'm just going to go briefly over how the policy submission process will go this year for both medical schools and teaching hospitals. So today we've had the informational webinar, and there'll be an opportunity for question and answers after the webinar is completed, and there will be a recording available and posted on the scorecard website for you all to use and your colleagues to use to help guide you in the policy submission process and policy development process. On August 15th, there will be a link that will be live for academic medical centers to upload their policies and fill out an online submission form about demographics. So for instance, we'll be asking medical schools to list what teaching hospitals their students rotate through and to give an estimate of the percentage of students that rotate at each of the hospitals. We'll also have asking about different demographic questions for teaching hospitals, namely, which medical schools are they affiliated with, and if they have community offsite clinics also affiliated with them as well. The deadline to upload policies and to complete for these forms is November 1st. And I just want to note that that would be the last date for which all of you can ask for an extension. If you're in the process of revising your policy and need a little bit longer time to complete those policy revisions, please let us know beforehand so we can note that you need a little bit more time to upload the policies. For schools that do not respond to the policy submission process and do not respond to the scorecard director regarding their status, we'll be contacting you pretty routinely until November 1st, and then by that time we'll assume that the school does not have a policy in place, and we'll be giving those schools an X, not an F this year, an X for not submitting anything or being non-responsive. The scorecard will be released next year, next spring in April, on the revamped AMSA Scorecard's website, and we'll be sending updates about the website as the policies are coming in and as the analysts are grading them. Next slide. So we have a couple of requirements for posting of the policies. We've received different qualities of policies throughout the years, and we want to make sure that we have the best quality policies to blind them and to ensure that the analysts are able to read, read and grade the policies properly. So first, we would want a first generation quality policy. So no, please don't send any scanned copies or faxes or any picture files. These tend to be blurry and hard, very, very difficult for the analysts to read and for our blinders to go through to blind the school's names. We request that you send PDF or Word documents of the policies, and for any curriculum materials that might be in PowerPoint, that's fine as well. Please just label these files as being curriculum pieces as appropriate. Additionally, please do not submit any hyperlinks to your policies. These won't be accepted as a policy. We request that you send us the PDF or Word version of these documents. Also, please don't submit any articles or any academic articles that might be a part of the curriculum, only policies. If there are articles that are given to students as curriculum materials, simply list them in a Word or PDF document and let us know that this is a part of the curriculum for either medical students teaching faculty members, and house staff. Again, the online submission form is required for the policy submission process to be considered complete. If the form is not completed, we will assume that you have not that your policy submission is incomplete. On the policies that you do submit to us, please make sure there's no watermarks or backgrounds on the policies. Our blinders need to go through and blind these policies in a very systematic way, and these marks and backgrounds makes it very difficult to do so. Additionally, please do not send us any audio or video presentation files. Just if you do have these files in place, or if there's an online link to them, if you could detail these out on a Word or PDF document and let us know that these are curricular pieces or training pieces as a part of your policy, that'll be fine. Only text in the policy will be scored. If submitting these extra files or articles will not be scored, they'll just be considered as supplementary material to your policies. Finally, probably the most important thing is that we would love for you to clearly label all of the files appropriately. If you could simply list out that this is a policy for teaching hospital X on continuing medical education on whatever specific topic, that'd be great. In the past, we've had a lot of confusion with the different labels, so please send your most current, properly labeled files for the policy submission. Next slide. We also have a number of resources for you to use to help you in your policy development process, but also to help keep you up to date on the policy submission process. So you can check on the AMSA Scorecard website, amsascorecard.org, for the latest scorecard information and past year's scoring. Again, the domains have changed pretty dramatically from last year to now. Please use this as kind of a reference material in your policy development process. Additionally, if you need any, all the links for the supplementary material and regarding the domains and the presentation slides will be on amsa.org/scorecard, and we have a link on the page as well. Finally, the next resource we can offer you are toolkits. Our grant partner, Community Catalyst, which is a consumer advocacy group based in Boston, has developed toolkits around these specific domains with examples of ideal policies from other institutions in the toolkits that will help you, guide compliance offices and administrators in developing new policies or revising your policies on specific topics. Additionally, we also offer one-on-one support from our grant partner organizations. We have worked with many medical schools and teaching hospitals in the past to help improve their policies and even develop new policies. And we can answer any individual questions you might have during the policy submission and revision process. I'm now going to turn. Okay.
Thanks, Dr. Carla. Thanks, Ms. Ramachandran. At this time, we'd like to open the presentation to questions. And again, if you'd like to email a question instead of asking one over the phone, please feel free to send it to me, sberg@pewtrust.org, and you can find my email on the webinar viewing screen. So at this time, we'll open it up to questions.
Yes, I have a question for Reshma Ramachandran.
Yes.
Yes,
and may we ask where you're calling from?
Yes, I'm calling from Newburyport, Massachusetts.
Great.
And so the question is about the drug rep policy. I was a little confused. It sounds like in order to get a 5, you can have a drug rep come see you, but you're not allowed to talk about certain things.
Yes. So we don't allow for sales representatives, pharmaceutical sales representatives, to be present on campus. However, you can solicit scientists or other employees from the pharmaceutical company to talk specifically about research and scientific information regarding their products. Besides that, we do not allow for any promotional employees to be present on campuses or teaching hospitals to interact with faculty, students, or house staff.
I have a question as well. I'm calling from Washington, D.C., and what happens if I'm late with my policy? Do I get an F?
If you're late with your policy and you know you're going to be late with your policy beforehand, please let the scorecard team know. We'll be contacting you pretty frequently until November 1st to ensure that we have all of your policy documents and make sure we have the most up-to-date information on all of your policies. But if you do need to turn your policies late, that's completely fine as long as we have advance notice. If you don't respond to us and we don't hear from any representatives from your institution, we'll assume that you don't have any policies in place to submit, and we'll be giving the school or institution an X for that year unless you tell us otherwise. And we'll let you know beforehand that we're doing this, so it's not a shock. For schools that are in the process of developing policies and don't expect to have a policy in place by 2014, we do offer a score of in process, and we give a 1-year period for that institution to develop their policies, and we'll publicly post on the website that the institution has 1 year to develop the policies and that we will offer our assistance in doing so. But once that 1 year is completed, we'll need a new update on the status of the policies being drafted.
Yes, I have another question from Newburyport.
Yes?
Yes, go ahead.
On the CME policy, so our institution has a system where the company will provide funding through the CME office, which is a central office. The company can request that the money go to a particular department, but they have no way of requesting, a particular course or particular faculty member or anything like that. So, how is that? Did that get us a 5 or a 4? I was confused about that distinction.
So that score will actually get you a 3. I'm looking at my set of slides and okay. But yeah, that score will get you a 3 because the industry can have input into which department or division the funding goes to. We give a 3 score for when industry support is accepted through a department or division, and when there are measures in place, like you mentioned, where industry is not allowed to earmark the funds for a specific topic or speaker, and that the department can't make any profit from the programs. We do say, however, that the CME activity cannot be supported by no less than 2 companies. If there's only one company that's earmarking funds to that department or division, then the score will have to be dropped down to a 2. No.
And what exactly is a blinded pool? What does that mean?
A blinded pool means that the institution has no idea. Their institution has a central office by which they accept funds from multiple companies, but the institution has no does not disclose which companies have given money to the pool. And that these are just simply a pot of funds that can be used for educational activities at the central office's discretion without any input from industry and any input from a specific department or division.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for calling in. And as we mentioned, we will have a recording available at a later time so that you can go back and review all of these domain areas. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Have a great day.
Went great.
All right.